Hello everybody, my name is Christian Swenson. I'm autistic, I'm on the autism spectrum, and I make videos about autism, autistic consciousness, and life on the autism spectrum. Today I wanted to do a video about the autistic experience of selfhood, of being a self, of having a self, of being yourself, of the letter that we use in English, I. You know that letter, I'll write it for you, in case you don't know how to spell it. It's I, spoiler alert, I. Right? The experience of being myself, of being I. And, you know, you might think that we have the same experience that anybody else does, but I wager we won't. I wager we don't. And I think the reason why is because, well, let me give some evidence why first. So let's say I'm going to a restaurant, and the waiter will come to me and say, enjoy your food. And sometimes I, at least, will say, you too. Of course, he's not going to enjoy his food. He'd better not be eating, except if it's on his break. But I say, because he said it, I say you must be, I say you too, even though he's not eating. For the moment, I had forgotten that I was the one eating and he was the one not eating. I had forgotten that I was myself. I had forgotten the distinction between self and other. And this is an example of what is called in autism mind blindness. Just like some people are blind to light, we are blind to the emotions of other people. And this doesn't mean we're not empathetic. It doesn't mean we're mean or cruel or lack love. It is something a lot more primal than that. It is, instead of having too much of a self, we don't have enough of one. In the situation, it isn't that I'm so absorbed in myself, whatever that means, that I project myself onto other people. It's not that at all. It's more like I am what I'm doing. I am the eating. I am the wholeness of what I see, of what I'm doing. I am the verb of it, not the noun. And I assume that because I'm the eating, because the eating is all there is, so to speak, everybody else must be eating too, including the waiter. And this is, you know, what happens when autistic people, like maybe yourself, assume things that aren't necessarily the case about other people. I would wager it's because, not because you are unempathetic or cruel, it's because you don't see that the world is bigger than right here, right now. In a sense, we live in the present far too much. And I think it's difficult because the word I, that word, enables us to transcend the present. It enables us to transcend the present by having a consistent identity over time from past to future. You know? The word I lets us form an identity that helps us relate socially, but then you start to think that issues of time, issues of change, issues of relationship and connection, all those are things with the autism spectrum, and I think you could maybe connect it all to this word, this little letter I. You know, maybe the best way to think about it is that, you know, in autism, you know, it isn't a self disease, not a disease of too much self, which is literally what autism means if you go to the roots in Greek. I think it's Greek, but it's a disorder of not enough self. We're transparent to the world. We are what we're around. We love our special interests. We get lost in what we're doing. We obsess. And of course, how could that be a self? My special interest has nothing to do with me. If I get lost in it, I'm getting lost in it. I'm not having it get lost in me. I'm getting lost in it. It's a self-emptying. It's having not enough self, not too much self. And I think that's a really crucial distinction to remember because it can be really easy when people accuse you of, you know, being unfeeling or unempathetic to remind them that there's a difference between kinds of empathy. There's a difference between empathy that has to do with, oh, I can tell that you're sad, right? Or maybe a better way to say it is, oh, I can tell that you're trying to use this subtle body language thing. I can tell what's going on inside your mind. There's a difference between that and the feeling of feeling sad for someone and feeling the emotions they're feeling when you know they're feeling them. The first one is cognitive empathy, the feeling of being able to spontaneously predict and model other people's states, a theory of mind, which mind blindness is the opposite of. We're not so good at that. However, the other one, we're really good at. We tend to care a lot. We care too much, and that makes sense, because if we don't have so much of this, it makes sense that we bleed ourselves out into the world. Autistic people out of all people, tend to be some of the most caring, the most empathetic, the people who lose the most sleep over world issues. And, to call us cruel or indifferent or aloof in that sense is itself kind of cruel. There's this woman, her name is Donna Williams. She recently died. She has a YouTube channel, or had a YouTube channel. It's still around. It kind of stopped suddenly, which is really sad. She died of cancer. She was autistic, and she wrote a lot of books about autism. She wrote a few bestsellers and had a YouTube channel. You should check her out. But one of the books she wrote is called Autism and Sensing, The Unlost Instinct. It's kind of like an obscure little book. I have a copy. But in it, she kind of comes up with this little 4x4 matrix of the ways of relating self to other that I think is really helpful in this context. So most people that aren't autistic are usually in this top one: all self, all other. There's an awareness of myself. There's this I that I'm aware of, but I'm also aware of you, and I'm aware of both at the same time. I'm rarely there. I think most autistic people are rarely, if ever, there. It's usually one of these two: all self and all other, or no self, or all self, all other and no self. And an example of what this is, say if you're neurotypical, is you're picking your nose in a public place and you'd forgotten that people were around you. That's all self, no other. All other, no self. That's something interesting, is maybe you're listening to someone very intently and you'd forgotten that they'd stopped speaking and that it's your turn. That's all other, no self. And I think, we can flip between these two as autistic people quite often. The experience of, info dumping would be something maybe like this. And then the experience of, of getting lost in a texture or just something we're listening to, or even a special interest would be something like this. And again, neither of these really have much to do with the typical experience of this, I would say. I mean, this is all self and no other for sure, and you could say it's all self. But in another way, right, it's not like I'm assuming when I'm info dumping to you that I'm better than you. It's not like I'm assuming that you deserve the things that I need because I'm ignoring your needs. It's more like I'm not thinking in terms of self and other at all. It's more like I am so enthusiastic about this idea that I assume you must be too, and I want to share my enthusiasm because it's so joyful for me. But you could maybe think about it this way, even though they may not fit entirely. But this one's really interesting: no self and no other. I think this is something that only autistic people typically experience, and neurotypical people maybe don't experience at all. It's the experience of not being aware of yourself, not being aware of the world, but just being. The experience of just sitting and losing yourself in something. The experience of just evaporating. The experience of dissolving. Not in a bad way. It can be very, very blissful. In fact, if you're autistic and you haven't just sat for a long time in front of something and just not done anything, you haven't lived, because that can be one of the most blissful experiences you can ever experience, because it's hard to describe. It's like there's nothing there, or that's joyful. It's so joyful because you're just liberated. This is what meditators are trying to experience for decades. And for most autistic people, it's much easier, or for a lot of autistic people anyway. And this idea is really that I'm really getting to is really important, and I wanted to emphasize it because you are not an egotist. You're not arrogant. You're not cruel. You're autistic, and autistic doesn't mean self-focused. It means not having enough of a self. And in a way, how joyful is that? Because who would want to be themselves forever? It's like, who would want to be just me forever and ever and ever? That sounds really boring, doesn't it? Well, maybe you don't have to be. Maybe the sounds and the textures and everything around me is enough. And if you lose yourself in it, if you devote yourself to it, like we do in our special interests and our and the ways we, just will like look at the texture of an apple sometimes. I've heard autistic people talking about that. I don't know if people who aren't autistic get to experience that. And maybe that's worth it. I don't know. Maybe it's not. It can be hard sometimes, and it often really is for me, but there you go. So, yeah, feel free to subscribe, leave a like, leave a comment if you'd like. I'd really appreciate it. I try to post at least once a week. Take care and have a good week.